I'm behind the wheel of the 2023 BMW M2 with an 8-speed automatic. And as you might see, I'm in stop and go traffic in Chicago, which is something that I usually encounter every single day. And I guess that's the point of this review, because not all of us have the chance to take the BMW M2 on the track or maybe on some of the curvy roads. Chicago is pretty flat, so when it comes to the fun experience aboard any sports car, you gotta drive out quite a few hours before you can enjoy some really nice curvy roads. So for most of us that live in a place like this, daily driving the BMW M2 will look something like this. So 20-30 miles per hour constantly, lots of stoplights. And essentially this is why I wanted to drive the M2 with a 6-speed manual and also with an 8-speed automatic in Chicago to see how they compare when it comes to the daily driving experience. So let's start with that off the bat, because a lot of people ask me all the time, should I pick the new BMW M2 with a 6-speed manual or should I get the 8-speed automatic? I touched on this subject when I drove the two cars in Phoenix. I had a chance back then to take both cars back to back. At that time, in case you missed the video, I said that if you're looking to keep your M2 for a very, very long time, if you enjoy being more connected with the car, and especially if you enjoy rolling your own gears, then clearly you cannot go wrong with a 6-speed manual. Granted, there are a few shortcomings. Essentially, it's the old same 6-speed manual in BMWs. I mean, BMW hasn't changed that transmission probably since the E92 and the E82 1M. So let's talk about that briefly. As you know, it's quite a rubbish transmission. The second gear is quite long. It's not extremely smooth. You're getting those jerky shifts all the time. It will take some time to get adjusted to that springy clutch as well. So the daily driving experience, it's quite different because of that. Of course, it helps quite a bit that the new M2 comes with a rev matching component. My BMW 1M doesn't have that, and the experience in that car, it's extremely, extremely different than in the M2. I know when to downshift to be at the right RPM. I'm always ready to floor that gas pedal and making sure that I'm in the right gear, so it doesn't bother me too much. So I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate, a lot of flack on social media by saying this, but when it comes to the new BMW M2, I have to say I do prefer the 8-speed automatic a lot better. There are a couple of reasons. One of them, I feel like the S58 6-cylinder engine matches the 8-speed automatic a lot better than the 6-speed manual. That was not my first impression when I drove the car back to back in Phoenix, because I was going mostly fast on those curvy roads. So the driving experience was a lot different. I was always in the right gear, so I never had to really downshift and do all that work with the 6-speed manual to notice some of its shortcomings. And you might have heard by now of the famous throttle house 4-gear test, where essentially they decided to go into the 4th gear at very low speeds to see if the engine's power will match the transmission. Clearly there was a huge lag from the time they floored the gas pedal until the car really pushed forward fast. So of course that's not a very realistic scenario, and I've talked about that in our print review, because essentially you always want to make sure that you're at the right RPM, especially with a 6-speed manual. But nonetheless, it's something that's quite obvious when you're driving the 6-speed manual, that it doesn't match as well as the 8-speed automatic, the S58 engine. This engine is a little bit different than the S55, for example, because if that engine wanted to push hard from low RPMs, the S58, its power curve, from what I remember, it does like to be in the higher RPMs in order to deliver that power instantly. So that's one of the big differences in between the 6-speed manual and the 8-speed automatic, aside from the daily drive use, which clearly it's a lot more comfortable in the 8-speed automatic. I do have to say that I'm less engaged with the car when I'm driving the 8-speed automatic, and that doesn't take away from the capabilities of the car, because in this case, the 8-speed automatic absolutely matches better the S58. It is always ready to go, as you can see right here. Basically, I was in the 4th gear at about 60 miles per hour, and within a split of a second, I was up to 80 miles per hour without having to do anything. So once again, let's go. I'm in 8th gear right now, 75, and look. it just puts the power down a lot better than the 6-speed manual. So if initially I thought that two cars have a similar character, the 6-speed manual and the 8-speed automatic, I have to backtrace a little bit on that, because as you see in normal driving, there is a little bit of a difference in between the two cars. Even though BMW told me at that time, hey, we developed the BMW M2 to be kind of equal when it comes to the 6-speed manual and 8-speed automatic, so they essentially should feel and drive the same. Of course, with the caveat that all of us are actually different, right? So if some of us might prefer the engagement of a 6-speed manual and having that connection with the car, there are plenty of us that prefer the more comfortable drive of an 8-speed automatic. And this is why, if I were to buy the BMW M2, I would absolutely go for the 8-speed automatic. I posted that on Instagram actually yesterday, where I talked about the spec of this car, and I said that for a normal driving scenario, the M Sport seats are perfect. They're comfortable, they're sporty enough for me. So people, of course, picked on me because of that, because I am not a true driver, I'm not a true enthusiast, I'm not even a Beamer guy, because I prefer the 8-speed automatic and I prefer the M Sport seats in the BMW M2. And I did reply to some of those comments, telling people that not only we're all different as drivers, but as you get older, you're starting to appreciate a lot more the comfort of a BMW car, even of an M car, even though that goes against the DNA of an M car, because in the past the M cars were all about sportiness and all of that. But customers are changing, and this is the reason why BMW is building today the M cars to be kind of like a Swiss army knife. They don't want you to have just a track weapon, they want you to have also a daily driver. And this is why when you go into the settings of the car, you can configure the M2 to be either a very comfortable daily driver or to be a track weapon. It's so easy to change the character of the car, a lot easier than ever before. The same with the M3 and M4. So if you go into the engine, you can go from an efficient to a sport and sport plus, chassis the same, steering and brake, and essentially you can have a dual character car in a single product. That doesn't make me less of an enthusiast, that doesn't make me less of a driver, and that certainly doesn't make me less of a Beamer guy. Because if I do want to track this car, believe me, I can take the 8-speed automatic to the track with the M Sport seats, go all the way to Sport Plus, even turn off the DSC or go into the MDM mode, and I promise you that this car will deliver that driving experience that you would expect from an M2. So now let's talk about the design of the BMW M2, because that's equally important as the driving experience. You probably have seen plenty of comments online about the design of the M2, and from my point of view, it's not a surprise, because we've already seen the 2 Series Coupe that came out a few years ago, and that had a controversial design, and naturally BMW was going to base the M2 on that generation. So the M2 40i and the M2, they share a lot of the genes. So maybe let's start with that. With this generation BMW M2, the designers decided to move away from the iconic double headlamps that you used to see on BMW cars. And as you can see right here, it's got a single headlamp. So that's probably the biggest change at the front. They moved away from the double headlamps, and now they have this single integration of a bulb inside. Of course, it doesn't have the very large skinny grille of the M3 and M4, and that's a plus in my opinion. Nonetheless, the skinny grille is a little bit controversial because it moves away from the vertical slats and it has these horizontal slats which BMW says they're motorsport inspired. This is something that you used to see on BMW racing cars, and now they end up on this generation BMW M2. It's an M car, so clearly the entire front end is massive, it's quite aggressive, and some people say maybe it's a little bit too much because you do have a lot of shapes at the front, a lot of squared up shapes, as you can see right there, the air breathers, and then of course the central air intake and another air breather on the side. I do recall a conversation with the BMW M2 designer, and I asked why the very square shape at the front, and he said it's all because of functionality. So essentially they wanted to mimic the shape of the radiators, which are placed behind the front bumper, to be exactly the same square shape or rectangular shape as the air breathers, for example, and then of course as the central air intake. They're saying that this is more of a functional over form design, so they wanted to make sure that all these pieces tie nicely together. So once again, BMW stays true to their philosophy, function over form. It's not something that we always appreciate or we always love, but they always have that in mind because first of all, they want to make sure that there is plenty of cooling and plenty of aerodynamic properties at the front end of this car. So once again, it's one of those things you either love it or hate it. I am torn because when I see this car in this particular color and maybe in all black as well, the black sapphire, I truly love the front end. It looks massive, looks aggressive. And as you can see in the footage, when you see the car coming from behind, it looks really wide, very, very boxy, and it does stand out. I've been driving the car quite a bit the last few days, and I can tell you a lot of people stop me to ask me about the car and look at the design because they actually like it. So will regular customers embrace the design? It remains to be seen. But nonetheless, this is the front end of the BMW M2. Now, just like all the M cars, it has to have a power dome hood, and BMW decided to give that hood right here. Speaking of the hood, you don't have the aggressive lines that you might see on some other BMW M cars. Instead, the centerpiece, the center stage is being taken by this power dome hood. As you can see, the car sits quite low. It's got a little bit of a slanted nose, and that's not only iconic to past BMW M cars, but I'm sure it has something to do with the pedestrian regulations as well. Of course, some people call this the Lego car, and they might be right because it's quite square. But I would say this one pays homage in some ways to the E36 M3 because that car kind of followed the same philosophy. Now, when we look back so many decades, of course, we look at the E36 M3 as one of the holy M cars, the holy grail M cars, a beautiful, beautiful design. But I do wonder back then if people thought the same thing about the E36 M3, especially after coming from the E30 M3. Nonetheless, this is the front end of the BMW M2. Now, if you look at the side, once again, it starts with the tires and wheels. This is exactly the same setup as the M3 and M4. And in many ways, BMW engineers said that they wanted to build this car around the tire setup because that plays a huge role in the driving dynamics of an M car, of any car in general. So they took the same setup from the M3 and M4 and they put it into the M2. There is a little bit of a gap here in between the fender and the wheel, a lot more than I thought. It's maybe about 3, 4, 5 inches, which is quite a bit. And I did ask BMW why. And they said because they have to account for all the markets, for all the roads in the world. And if the car will be sitting a little bit too low, then there might be some issues with that. Nonetheless, this is an easy fix. You can always lower the car. They do also offer an aftermarket suspension as well, kit. So you can go for that, or you can go for any other third-party suspension. If you look at the shapes, you can see very clean shapes at the top. Of course, you have this character line running across, which aims to separate the top from the bottom. That's always something that BMW wants to do because when you look from the side, you can actually make the car appear a little bit smaller and sitting a little bit lower by just using one of those lines that separates the top from the bottom. Of course, the entire shape here is quite clean. We're used to seeing a lot of creases running around. You do have a very subtle one right there, which once again creates some really interesting shadows, especially in different light and especially on a color like Brooklyn Grey. I would say the main piece or the main design feature on the side of the M2, it's probably this rocker panel because it is quite wide and it sticks out quite a bit. I would say it's about 3 inches, about 3-4 fingers probably wide, and that's something that you don't usually see on an M car. So why did they do that? Because they had to match the rear fenders, and I'm going to show you that in a second. This is a base BMW M2, so it doesn't have the carbon fiber package. So instead of a carbon fiber roof, you're getting a sunroof. So that's an option in the US. If you are getting the carbon fiber package, you will also get the carbon fiber buckets inside and of course the roof as well. Clearly M mirrors, no surprise there. Once again, something that you expect to see on a BMW car. Now, despite the car being kind of the same size as the outgoing M2, for some reason, there isn't a lot of space in the back seat. And I'm going to demonstrate that in a second. All right, so pushing that handle forward, it moves the seat for you. Once again, I'm about 6'2" tall. You can see quite tight to get inside. Of Of course, if you have someone as tall as me driving, it will be tough to fit in here. So let's take a look at that. So the seat moves backwards. So right now I'm actually being squeezed in, so I don't have any room at all. My knees are really pressed against the seat. It is not comfortable at all. Of course, I could adjust this a little bit and give you a better idea. So once again, if you have someone that's not as tall in the front, then this will be a decent position. But as you can see, there is not much room at the front either. So that person has to be on the smaller side. I'm also trying to see if I can fit my head, and if I just sit normally upright, there is really no headroom. The only way to get some headroom is really to kind of slouch a little bit and lean backwards, and that way maybe I'm getting about a finger or two, maybe 1 inch, 2 inches max of headroom, and that's being generous. Of course, if you drive over bumps or over imperfect roads, you'll definitely hit your head right here. So I'm not sure why BMW gave the M2 less room in the back. I remember asking that question, but I never really got an answer on that. So I would say this car, it's really a car for 2 people. It does have the space for 4, but I would say this space, it's only manageable if you have really small people or children, or if you just want to transport your bags in the back seat. This is not meant for long distances, and you should not be planning on going on a long road trip with 4 adults, because they will be miserable in the back. So this was the space inside the BMW M2. All right, so here is the rear end of the BMW M2, and as I said earlier, it is quite wide. You can see right here, those hips really stick out. And I would say if you're driving from behind, you will definitely notice that. And the footage that we're going to show you today will probably highlight that particular feature on the BMW M2. Once again, very square shapes overall. As you can see, it's got the same boxiness that you see up front. Personally, I do like this one in certain angles, especially when I see it dead on from the back. I think it looks quite cool and very bold, very sporty at the same time. And it's also quite unique on the road. So if you're looking to stand out and have a different type of design, then this one will definitely do the job. Now, if you're going back and comparing to the F87 M2, of course, that car was all about rounded shapes, very clean surfaces, such a beautiful design, timeless in many ways. Nonetheless, in 20 years from now, maybe we will say the same thing about the G87 M2. Just like with all the base M2 models, it's got a very solid spoiler right here. Of course, you can go for the M Performance parts, and you got a couple of options there. A little bit more aggressive carbon fiber one, but you also have the racing wing that you've seen on the M Performance car that we've shown you from Phoenix. Typical to BMW M cars, once again, you have the quad pipes. They're quite large. I believe they're the same size that on the M3 and M4, and they sound the same. It's essentially the same setup. It's the same engine that you see on the G80 and G82. It's got a piano black diffuser, of course, aggressively sculpted, aggressive design there. If that's not your cup of tea, you can once again go for the carbon fiber option from the BMW M Performance parts. Of course, it's got the coupe-ish look, so that looks quite good, especially from a 3/4 view or from the side. So no major changes there compared to the first generation BMW M2. The taillights, they are different than what you've seen on other BMWs. They do resemble the BMW M240i for sure. They're inverted, so they're pointing downwards. I kind of wish they were pointing upwards. I've seen that in the design sketches, and I did like that design a lot more with the typical BMW L shape going upwards, not downwards. Smoked glass right there. Of course, you got this beautiful integration of the taillight inside, and it looks really good at nighttime. You might have seen this one in previous videos as well. Cargo space, I have a backpack right now, so essentially it's really the same space that you would have in a BMW M2. You can probably fit a decent size carry-on bag, and of course maybe even a check bag as well. So not too bad if you have to travel over long distances and you have a lot of things to put inside the boot. So this is the rear end design of the BMW M2. Let's open up the hood so you can take a look at the engine bay, and I can tell you more about the specs on this car. All right, so let's talk about the engine specs. BMW's S58 engine from the M3 and M4. Once again, a lot of the parts are coming from the M3 and M4, and the engine is one of them. So 3.0 six-cylinder engine making 453 horsepower and 406 pounds-feet of torque. It can send the power to the rear wheels either via a 6-speed manual transmission or in this particular case via an 8-speed automatic, the ZF transmission that we know from many other BMW cars. As you can see, the engine bay is quite compact. You have a lot of braces that help with the front stability of the car and the front precision of the car and the sharpness. I've talked about that before, but maybe it's worth mentioning one more time. You have those struts right there, one on the top, and underneath here, you have another brace which makes sure that the front end is sharp. You can corner nicely and exit nicely out of the corners. So that's one improvement also in this generation M2 compared to the previous M2. Speaking of that, on the C-pillar, there is also another brace right behind the body panels, which also help with the stiffness of the rear end. And I'm going to talk about that more as we drive the car. Once again, if you want to have fun with this car, you will, because you can put everything into the MDN mode as I am right now. The rear end becomes a lot more playful because, as I mentioned in the previous video review, BMW wanted with its M2 to make that rear end less playful. They wanted the rear end to be a lot more precise, have a lot more grip. But if you want to have fun, simply put everything in Sport Plus, put it in MDM, and this car will definitely deliver some exciting driving dynamics. Once you flick everything into the highest setting, let's say the MDM mode, then the M2 comes to life. It's a car that's extremely precise. It's a car that's extremely sharp. And even the steering wheel goes from that numb feeling that you might be getting in comfort to one that maybe it's not as good as the old mechanical steerings, but nonetheless it is still quite good for an M car today. But of course you can have some fun with the BMW M2. So if you take this car on any twisty roads or on the track, I promise you the BMW M2 will come to life and it will put a smile on your face. Once again, I do prefer the 8-speed automatic because it puts the power down a lot better than the 6-speed manual. It might not be as engaging and you might feel a little bit disconnected from the car without the 6-speed manual, but going fast, it will definitely make a difference. Naturally, any good driver, any pro driver will have the same amount of fun with the 6-speed manual, but I would say overall, for a normal daily driver, this 8-speed automatic, it's fantastic. The shifts are extremely precise, they're extremely smooth. This ZF 8-speed transmission has been refined over time by BMW, and with every generation new M car coming out, it keeps getting better and better. And sometimes I do wonder if there is anything better out there than this, because this transmission, it matches perfectly with the character of the S58, of course even the B58, and it's a marvel to have in an M car. Yes, we're all dreaming of the old DCT, which had a different character, and of course that was a great transmission as well, but unfortunately that boat has sailed a long time ago. The car has been criticized so far by the media, by some customers, that it's not as playful as the M2 competition, as the M2 CS, and they're absolutely right. The idea of this car, according to BMW, was to really make this an easy to drive M car. The idea was not to make it the same as the previous M2 competition. Of course, some of us might dislike that because we did like the playfulness of the previous F87, and I definitely enjoy my 1M, which if you're not careful, it will kill you in an instant because that rear end tends to spin out on you quite quickly and you have to be really careful driving the car. Now, of course, if you go into some of those twisty corners, I can still feel that front end being extremely sharp, extremely precise. You feel like the car is very predictable and very controllable. Of course, any enthusiast that hears the word controllable and predictable might be cringing a little bit because that's not something that you usually want to hear about a sports car, about an M car. But nonetheless, this is the M2 today. and this is what you're getting with this new generation M2. I do have a feeling that an M2 CS will kind of fix that behavior a little bit. It will be a little bit more playful, it will be less controllable and less predictable. Of course, that will come with a price hike, so that's a totally different story. Of course, it wouldn't be a proper BMW review without talking a little bit about the steering feedback. It's the same steering rack as in the BMW M3 and M4, so no mechanical changes from that one. If you go in the comfort mode, it is quite soft, quite numb, it's not very engaging, you're not getting a lot of feedback from the road. And once again, I've said this before, it is nothing new. If you've been driving BMW M cars for the last few years or more than that, I promise you, you will get a similar experience. BMW tries to constantly improve that steering with every new generation, but it comes down to this: you're never going to be able to match the mechanical steering that we've had in the E90 generation or on my 1M, for example. It can feel a little bit more engaging, a little bit more precise, and a little heavier if you go into the Sport Plus setting. Of course, you can adjust that through the iDrive menu. So essentially, if you want to get more heft in the steering, you have to do that. So, 6-speed manual. You should buy that 6-speed manual if you want to keep the car forever or for a very long time. It's a unicorn. It's not something that BMW will ever make again. And if you care about the appreciation of your car, I would say the 6-speed manual might be the one that does the trick. Also, if you want to feel a lot more engaged with the BMW M2, a lot more connected to the car, to the road, and to the driving experience, then I would say the 6-speed manual, it's once again the choice to have. So why should you get the 8-speed automatic in the BMW M2? For one reason only: daily driving. It does make the daily driving experience a lot smoother, a lot easier, a lot more comfortable than the 6-speed manual. Even though you feel a little bit disconnected from the car, you are definitely more comfortable driving the M2, especially if you're like me, where you do a lot of highway driving, a lot of stop and go traffic, as I'm about to hit right now. And that's when the 8-speed automatic, it makes my life a little bit easier. You buy the 6-speed manual because you love to roll your own gears, and you buy the 8-speed automatic because you love the comfort of that transmission, the precision, and the smoothness. As simple as that. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this review. I would love to hear from you if you still prefer the 6-speed manual over the 8-speed automatic. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope it was useful. If you do have any comments for me, please leave them in the comments section below, and I will try to reply to all of them. Thanks for your support. And we just passed 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is huge for us, because even though we've been doing this since 2009, we've really pushed this forward and hard in the last few months, and it paid off. So we truly appreciate your support. And as always, I will see you in the next one.